Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Continuing with this reading from Vol.3 of the Ajahn Sumedho anthology called Direct Realization, and this talk is called Returning to the Way Things Are. So I read the first larger part of that yesterday. So let's continue on from where we finished last time. With mindfulness, we can open to the totality. In the beginning of this retreat, we open to the whole 2 months. On the first day, we already accepted in full awareness all possibilities: sickness and health, success and failure, happiness and suffering, enlightenment or total despair. We're not thinking, I'm only going to get ... I only want to have ... I want to have only the nice things happen to me. I've got to protect myself so that I'll have an idyllic retreat, be perfectly safe and tranquilized for 2 months. That in itself is a miserable state, isn't it? Instead, we take all the possibilities from the best to the worst, and we're doing this consciously. That means everything that happens during these 2 months is part of the retreat. It's a part of our practice. The way things are is Dhamma for us. Happiness and suffering, enlightenment or total despair, everything. So I've learned this from Luang Por Sumedho to be a very useful standard to establish at the beginning of any retreat, and so I usually make a point of underscoring this, making that clear, not just on these monastic retreats, but retreats for the lay community, that when the retreat begins, it's very helpful to set a clear and conscious intention to learn from whatever happens. Of course, we have a natural feeling of hope that things are going to go well and be pleasant, and a fear that things are going to be painful and difficult. Those feelings of hope or fear, anxiety are natural enough, but it's most skillful to set the intention that whatever happens, that'll be something that we learn from. As Luang Por Chah would say, everything is teaching us if we let it. That the natural tendency to say want the pleasant and not want the painful is completely ordinary, completely familiar to us. But if you set that intention that it's not whether it's pleasant or painful, but what can you learn from it, then it changes the framework for the whole of the event. And if you make that as clear and conscious as possible, then when you find yourself struggling with things, think, oh, this is just what I didn't want, oh no, not that knee again, oh, how could this be happening, or oh no, I've got that irritating person in the next room, what can I do about that? The memory of that resolution comes to mind. Okay, right, I did say to myself to be learning from everything. Okay, what can I learn from this painful knee, or this person in the next room that I have difficulty dealing with the sounds that they make, or whatever it might be, so that it's an extremely skillful, helpful, a standard to establish when, particularly when a retreat begins. But even if you're 10 days into it, like we are now, and you've realized, oh yes, I forgot about that, and that you have already been sort of busy chasing after the pleasant and running away from, or at least negotiating with the painful, then you say, okay, right, let's re-establish that, let's go back to that. Everything is teaching us, right, so what's the best way to work with this particular situation? If we practice this way, then despair and anguish take us to calm and peace. When I was in Thailand, I had a lot of these negative states: loneliness, boredom, anxiety, doubt, worry and despair, but accepted as they are, they cease. And what's left when there's no more despair? The Dhamma that we're looking at now is subtle. Not subtle in the sense that it's high up. It's so ordinary, so very much here and now that we don't notice it. It's just like the water for the fish. Water is so much part of its life, the fish doesn't notice it, even though it's swimming in it. Sensory consciousness is here now. It's this way. It's not distant. It's not really difficult. It's just a matter of paying attention to it. The way out of suffering is the way of mindfulness, mindful awareness, or wisdom. So that particular point, and that Luang Por highlights here, and it's one of those say aspects of practice that he refers to over and over again, is that even when it's a painful or uncomfortable mind state, something that we really don't like or don't want, that's painful, like boredom, loneliness, anxiety, doubt, worry, despair, and it's so easy for the mind to buy into those, to get drawn into the content of those despairing feelings and why you're despairing and why it's hopeless and why there's this insoluble problem and what you're going to do about your loneliness and boredom. The mind so easily gets pulled right into the content of those states. But if there is that more skillful attitude, if the view of those states is broadened, if you sort of recognize this feeling of despair, this is a feeling. This is a mood. It can't be an absolute reality. And then the mind says, well, what can I learn from this? What can be learned from this? Then, as he says, despair and anguish take us to calm and peace. So that when things are really known, they're not just sort of suppressed, or the mind says, I'm letting go. But actually what's going on is profound suppression and rejection. If it is a genuine letting go and seeing things as they are, then in painful emotional states, then they arise and they cease, and then in their passing there is peacefulness. What's left when there's no more despair? They take us to calm and to peace. That's their nature. That's what every state will do. And I think this point about subtlety is also very significant. That when we think about the Dhamma as being subtle, we can think of it as too refined, it's too far away, it's too remote. But it's I think the way that Luang Por speaks about it here, it's so familiar that we don't notice it, like the force of gravity or the fact of breathing oxygen. It's just, or the sense world, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. It's here all the time, so we don't notice it. But just that recognition of, oh, right, here is the force of gravity, it feels like this, or this is the experience of the sense world, it feels like this. And then that quality of recognition or awakening to the way things are, that's actualized through that. It's just because of the process of it's not exciting. Like, we don't think gravity is exciting, or we don't think oxygen is unusual unless you're at a very high altitude. How many of us wake up in the morning and think, oh, gravity again? It's another one of those days. We don't, because it's there all the time. It's not anything unusual. And so we don't notice it. So that it's change and pleasure and pain tend to grab the attention. If things don't seem to be changing and they're not pleasant or painful, they're neutral, the sensory system tends to just switch off. We don't notice it. So that awakening to the way things are, realizing Dhamma, is something that requires an attention to the subtle. And as Luang Por would often talk about as a skillful means, noticing the space between things, noticing the silence between sounds, or the space between words, or the space between objects, the space in a room rather than the people or the decorations, the structure of the room, to notice the quality of space and silence, the quality of stillness, and the eye, the ear, the sensory system is not geared to that. Space is not as interesting as people. People we like, people we dislike, people we know, people we don't know. The space between the people is not as interesting as the people. That's how it is. The attention doesn't go there. So the realization of Dhamma is a lot to do with that quality of, oh, wait a minute, what else is going on here? Like noticing the water for the fish. So we keep bringing our attention to the way things are. If you have nasty thoughts, or feel resentful, bitter or irritated, then notice what it feels like in your heart. If we're frustrated and angry during this time, it's all right, because we've already allowed for that to happen. It's a part of the practice. It's the way things are. Remember, we're not trying to become angels and saints. We're not trying to get rid of all of our impurities and coarseness and just be happy. The human realm is like this. It can be very coarse, and it can be pure. Pure and impure are a pair. To know purity and impurity is mindfulness wisdom. To know that impurity is impermanent and not self is wisdom. But the minute we make it personal, oh, I shouldn't have impure thoughts, we're stuck again in the realm of despair. The more we try to have only pure thoughts, the more the impure thoughts keep coming. That way we make sure we're going to be miserable for the whole 2 months. Guarantee it. Out of ignorance, we create a realm for ourselves that can only be miserable. So in mindfulness, or full-mindedness, all misery and all happiness are of equal value. No preferences. Happiness is this way. Misery is this way. They arise and they cease. Happiness is still happiness. It's not misery. And misery is still misery. It's not happiness. But it is what it is. And it's nobody's, and it's only that much. And we don't suffer from it. We accept it, we know it, and we understand it. All that arises ceases. All Dhammas are not self. Those last words are Sabbe Sankhara Anicca Sabbe Dhamma Anatta. That is repeated in our morning chanting. Also that comment that he makes here in this last section, all misery and all happiness are of equal value, as Luang Por would often say. I think the last time Ajahn Amaro gave a Dhamma talk, I think it was on that theme, that happiness and unhappiness are of equal value. Liking and disliking are of equal value, and that was a point that Luang Por would emphasize over and over again. Chop, my chop, tau tau gan. And we, on our instinctual, so habitual level, we go towards the things that we like, and we call them good, and the things that we dislike, we lean away from, and we call them bad. But in this same principle of learning from everything, like and dislike, happiness and misery, they are of equal value. And when we hear those words in a Dhamma talk or a reading like this, we can hear those words and go, yeah, right, absolutely, yeah, got it. And it makes perfect sense when we're hearing it as a teaching, and at that moment it's clear. And I'm speaking from how it works for me as well. And then, lo and behold, 5 minutes later, after the reading's finished, or you walked out of the Dhamma hall, or you've put the book down, the talk is over, and then the mind immediately starts gravitating towards what we like and shying away from. Trying to escape from what we dislike, and it's gone back to no. What I like is of much more value than what I dislike. This is good, that's bad, and the drift, like the pull into those habitual value systems is extremely strong. So when we hear a teaching like this, then it's very helpful to say, okay, right, I'm hearing that now. It makes perfect sense. How can that be really taken to heart? How can that be remembered and sustained? How can I really keep that in mind and use that as a way of measuring all of those tendencies to chase after the liked and to run away from the disliked? So that's the end of that particular talk. Any questions, thoughts, reflections on any of that? If you could use the microphone.
Just I'm curious to know which year that was. I'm curious to know.
That was the beginning of the 1988 winter retreat.
Thank you.
Most of the talks from The Way It Is were that from 1988. So that was the opening talk on the full moon of January 1988. You were there, I think. I'm pretty sure I was. Yeah. Yes, Maureen, if you could wait for the microphone that Gaspar is bringing. Thank you.
So my question kind of relates to what you were just saying about, you hear the talk and you're like, yes, of course, and it makes perfect sense, and you're like, yes, I can do that, and then you walk out and, something catches your eye that you like or whatever, the whole process. Mindfulness goes out the window and you're full into the content. So my question is, because often when I read something that Luang Por has said, or I would often listen to his talks on my way to work. I had a really long commute. And what I notice is that he seems to have this almost like an internal teacher. That's how it is. That's how it sounds when you hear his. That there's like this this wisdom director who's kind of like who inserts these little ways for him to reflect, and like he'll say, I had all these experiences of loneliness and despair and all that, but then I saw, and so my question is, what are some tools or what do you use to kind of bring that I guess it's simply mindfulness really, but that reflective inner teacher that we each must have and we have to have if we're going to do this practice? How do we cultivate that voice? Because for me, if I'm meditating, my mind actually wants to go into silence. So to generate something that creates words, like a thought that's word-oriented, like, oh, I should look at space instead of look at people, or something it goes against the grain of how I meditate, but I feel like it's useful, so I just wanted. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Well, there's a couple of things in there. Firstly, just recognizing the value of that, and I feel it's like an internal spiritual director, also listening to the Buddha wisdom, your intuitive wisdom. And like learning a language or learning a particular skill, a musical instrument or a computer program is, the more you use it, the more accessible it is, and the more skilled you become. And there might be one person might have more aptitude than another, but it's not magical. It's just like if you use it and you keep using it, then slowly the system takes it in and it becomes customary, it becomes ordinary. So if like learning a language, it might be that, yes, you've got a bit of an accent, but you're fluent, you know the language and you know what's being said and you can understand it, you can speak it. And so that continually drawing upon that intuitive wisdom, using it, applying it, and remembering to do that during the course of a day. I think a lot of it is how we place our attention during the course of a day. If we're around other people, if we're always sort of chatting and engaging and being a person, and having opinions and expressing our feelings and talking about memories and plans, and then that reflective quality is being obstructed generally because of the self-creating habit. So it's one of the reasons why there's an encouragement, to not engage in idle chatter. But if you've got something to say, then say it. If you've got nothing to say, then don't say it. Don't say anything. Also, if you're not with other people, you're not having to engage, then what do you do with your attention? Do you fill your mind with other sort of distractions? Do you sort of disconnect and just let the mind go very, very quiet? What do you do? How do you work with the mind in meditation? Or when you're not formally meditating, what do you put your attention onto? So I think first of all, seeing how we function when we're in company with other people, and carrying out our work, and to the degree that it's possible, sustaining that quality of watching what's going on for you. In that, if you're actually talking or having to take responsibility for some action, then it's best to really be paying attention to what you do and not trying to be too objective. But one of the things of using like body awareness, sensations of the body, developing that mindfulness of the body. Also using listening to the nada sound, the inner sound, because even in the midst of a business meeting or working in the kitchen, it's still there in the background. Even as the activity is going on. So the feelings of the body are there. The inner sound is there. So that those are things that are part of our natural way of being that can say, remember, 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 keep an eye on this. I think in terms of meditation, as you were saying, there's an inclination to let things go very, very quiet. And I think probably Ajahn Chandasiri will remember that when Luang Por was giving these winter retreats, 88, 89, 90, he really emphasized a lot of not doing that. Not just letting the mind go quiet, but consciously cultivating that reflective quality. And sometimes he'd be quite sort of fierce, like if you saw someone just sort of blissing out in the meditation, he would, and he got the impression that people were just sort of sunbathing, as it were, just enjoying the kind of the blissful feelings of a quiet mind. He would sort of get on our cases and say, don't just bliss out, but use the space. Rather like we have the space here in the temple, rather than just enjoying the emptiness and the silence of being here alone. You can use the space for a group meditation, for a reading like this. You can use the space for all kinds of useful activity. So similarly, the space of the mind, when the mind is quiet and uncluttered, you can use that space for all sorts of different useful things. So that he was, in those years, 88, 89, 90, and 91, I wasn't here, but I think those 3 years in particular, he would take, and we'll probably come across more of it in the later readings, he would take particular chunks of dependent origination, like tanha upadana bhava or avijja pachaya sankhara. He'd take little 2 or 3 links, and then encourage us to reflect on that. So you actually actively using the quiet of the formal practice to be looking at salayatna pasa vedana, 6 senses, contact, feeling, or tanha upadana bhava, craving, clinging and becoming, and in a way obstruct us from getting absorbed in just inner quietness, but using the inner space in a very active way. And so I think for a lot of us, particularly during those years, it was, I found it very, very helpful, because you learned how to think mindfully. And that was a key part of it. Because oftentimes we think that if the mind is quite active and busy, then just the idea of it, just shut up, please just be quiet. And then you develop concentration, and you get it to shut down and be quiet. You go, peace at last, great. And that's natural to sort of enjoy the quietness after a loud racket's been going on forever and ever. And you, peace at last. But what was very helpful in those years was that Luang Por was helping us to learn how to use conceptual thought in a way that didn't interrupt the peace of the mind. And so taking particular aspects of dependent origination, like ignorance, conditions, formations, or any of the other little groups of links, and then exploring that, using the space of meditation to keep bringing the attention back to those areas and investigating them and seeing, well, what do I understand by sankhara? So how does the link between contact and feeling work? What's contact? What's feeling? How does that function? And not just to have a sort of conceptual answer, but using the concepts to help one get a feel for that. And an interesting technique that he would encourage, and I found very helpful, is to train yourself how to think mindfully. You can use like a completely bland sentence, like today is Friday. The sort of emotion is a non-personal thing, it's uncharged, or this month is January. A sort of ordinary fact, a very short statement. This month is January, just 4 words, and then say, bring the attention to the present moment, let the mind be quiet, then think the words, this month is January. Be aware of it as it starts, consciously thinking the thought, be aware of it as it ends. So that you're thinking, they're using the vitakka, but it's not, the mind isn't getting lost in it or making any kind of proliferation around it, it's just, you can think mindfully, and then through learning it with that kind of a bland, non-personal, or not particularly interesting thought, then you begin to develop that skill of how to watch the mind as it thinks without getting lost in proliferations. So then you pick up a particular theme that you're interested in and use that, like, how does tanha connect with clinging? What's the difference between craving and clinging? Or how does that lead into becoming? What's my feeling for what becoming is? What's bhava, and so on? And learning to wisely reflect in that way, then you find that you can use the thinking mind and memory and imagination and intuition without getting lost without that being unpeaceful. The peace of the mind is sustained even as that reflection is going on. And then similarly, if you consciously use at least some of the meditation periods for that, then you begin to develop that as a skill. And it's not just that the meditation is this quiet, sort of beautiful space up in the attic that's sort of bright and pure and sort of bolt hole where you can hermetically seal yourself, which is pleasant and delightful, but it was really it was really striking and very helpful. A lot of Luang Por's effort in those years was to encourage us to use the meditation to develop that sort of inner intuitive wisdom, that wise reflection, and consciously cultivating that faculty. Because he also knew that Amaravati is a very active place, and it's very there's a lot of everyone has a lot of responsibilities and a lot of activity and people and things going on. So it's extremly natural to feel like, just some quiet space, just a little bit of time up in the attic where there's nothing going on. That's really nice. And so he was aware that there's a tendency to relate to the meditation in that just sort of shut everything down and be in that quiet, unengaged space. But he also saw that's not ultimately liberating, that it's pleasant, but it doesn't liberate in and of itself. And also, I think the last thing I would say on that is looking at the results, really appreciating the results of using that kind of intuitive wisdom, that wise reflection, and seeing how beneficial that is, and recognizing, that's that there's more activity, or there's a bit more engagement in that. But look what comes from it. Look at the quality of understanding, or the sense of appreciation how things work that comes from that. The quality of wisdom that is, and the freedom that comes from that's also part of it. Saying, oh, that this is a good result that comes from it. So that then that good result sort of speaks for itself and has its own attraction. Okay. So the next talk, we actually step out of 1988 and go back to 1979 for this one. This is called Investigating the Mind. The root of suffering is what we call avijja, not knowing or ignorance of the way things really are. This is the basic ignorance of not understanding our true nature. We suffer because of views and opinions, habits and conditions which we do not understand. We live our lives in a state of ignorance, not understanding the way things are. If you listen to yourself very much, you can sometimes hear such statements as, I should do this, but I shouldn't do that. I should be this way, and I shouldn't be that way. Or that the world should be other than it is, or our parents should be this way or that way, and shouldn't be the way they are. We have this word should, quote unquote, ringing through our minds because we have an idea of what shouldn't be or should be. In meditation, listen to that opinion within yourself of what should be and what shouldn't be. Just listen to it. We have a tendency to try to become something, and so we set a goal, create an ideal of what we would like to become. Maybe we think society should be other than it is. People should be kind, generous, understanding, loving. There should be brotherhood, and people shouldn't be selfish. The government should have wise leaders. The world should be at peace, and so forth. But the world is as it is at this moment in time, and things are as they are. When we don't understand this, we will struggle. So listen inwardly to yourselves, to the constant crying, I am this way, I'm not this way, and penetrate this, I am not, with awareness. We tend just to react and take it for granted that I am and I am not are the truth. We create ourselves as a personality and attach to our memories. We remember things we learnt, we remember what we've done. Generally, the more extreme things. We tend to forget the more ordinary things. So if we do unkind, cruel, foolish things, we have unpleasant memories in our lives and feel ashamed or guilty. If we do good things, charitable things, kind things, we have good memories in our lives. When you start reflecting on this, you'll be more careful about what you do and you say, because if you've lived your life foolishly, acting on impulse out of desire for immediate gratification, or an intention to hurt or cause disharmony or exploit others, you're going to be faced with a mind filled with very unpleasant memories. People who have led very selfish lives often have to drink a lot, take drugs, or keep themselves constantly occupied so they don't have to look at the memories that come up in the mind. In the awakening process of meditation, we're bringing awareness to the conditions of the mind here and now, just by being aware of this sense of I am not. Contemplate the feelings of pain or pleasure, the memories, thoughts and opinions as impermanent, anicca. The characteristic of transience is common to all conditions. How many of you have really investigated this in every possible way while sitting, standing or lying down? Investigate what you see with your eye, hear with your ear, taste with your tongue, smell with your nose, feel and experience with your body, think with your mind. The thought, I am, is an impermanent condition. The thought, I am not, is an impermanent condition. Thoughts, memories, consciousness of thinking, the body itself, our emotions, all conditions change. In the practice of meditation, you must be quite serious, brave and courageous. You must really investigate. Dare to look at even the most unpleasant conditions in life rather than try to escape, to seek tranquility or forget about everything. In Vipassana, the practice is one of looking into suffering. It's a confrontation with ourselves, with what we think of ourselves, with our memories, our emotions, pleasant, unpleasant, or indifferent. In other words, when these things arise and we're aware of suffering, we take the opportunity to examine it rather than rejecting, repressing, or ignoring it. So, suffering is our teacher. It's teaching us, so we have to learn the lesson by studying suffering itself. Though in 1979, this was, I'm not sure what the occasion was, it just says that it was given in this year, so this was just a couple of years after Luang Por had arrived from Thailand and was beginning his teaching in the West. Chithurst Monastery opened in June of 79, so it was possibly around those beginning months of Chithurst. I don't think Luang Por taught any retreats that year. Maybe he did. I'm not sure. But the theme here, I think, is a revisiting of that quality of idealism. How, particularly for Westerners, and I think what Luang Por was encountering so much when he first came to teach in the West, was that people tend to place the ideal of how we should be as individuals. That's the most important or dominant perception, is how I should be, what I should be like, and what I shouldn't be like, and that that was an issue that was coming up with so many people that Luang Por was teaching, so that he would emphasize, look at that, how the mind is going to what I should be like. We create an ideal of the perfect person, the perfect woman, the perfect man, the perfect Buddhist or the perfect meditator, what Buddhists should be like. And then starting from that ideal, then measuring our own experience against that, and then falling short and not being able to live up to that ideal, but rather than believe that or set up the mind in that way, just to instead bring that attention to the habits of self-view, of I am this, I'm a good person, I'm a bad person, I should be better, I shouldn't be this way. I have done so many awful things, or I'm a weak person, I'm a foolish person, I'm a incompetent meditator. I remember one fellow who used to come along to Chithurst in the early days, and he liked to introduce himself as a failed Buddhist. When he was asked, what are you, or what do you think of yourself, or how do you relate to yourself? He would say, I'm a failed Buddhist. So that that sense of, first of all, looking at those feelings of I am or I am not, and seeing how with any I am, there's the mind is creating dukkha right there. That intrinsic in that I am, the I making and mind making, that's the seed, the root of dukkha right there. And in several of the suttas, in the exposition of the elements, Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, the Buddha talks about this. He said, I am is a conceiving. So manyati is the Pali word for conceiving. I am is a conceiving. I am not is a conceiving. I should be is a conceiving. I should not be is a conceiving. And conceiving is like a cancerous tumor. It's like a being wounded by a dart. It's an affliction. It's burdensome. It's painful. So, and that it's kind of potent language. He's using sort of attention-getting language in that. But I feel it's helpful to highlight that, because particularly as Westerners, then that sense of I am, and in a way trying to to investigate or to look at our own condition, our own mentality, our own psychology, our own life, then you start off with an assumption of I am. Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, as Descartes put it, and that I amness is taken as an inarguable reality. But in this particular approach, or the development of vipassana, of insight, it's looking right at that I am feeling and saying, well, wait a minute, wait a minute, let's not start there. Let's look at that I amness, that I-making, ahankara, and mind-making, mamankara. Let's look at that, and and see the dukkha that comes from that. But then and then seeing that, rather than thinking, therefore, I'm a bad person, or I'm getting this wrong. That dukkha is our teacher. So it's that the dukkha that's coming from that I am. I'm a good person. I'm a bad person. I should be this way. I shouldn't be that way. That dukkha is the teacher. That's the signal that the mind is seeing things in an unclear way, in a distorted way. Therefore, there's dukkha. So that dukkha is the sign. That's the clue, or the flag that the mind is seeing things in a distorted way. So that rather than that dukkha being seen as something of bad or wrong or shouldn't be there, that becomes the entry point for wisdom, and that's why the first noble truth is dukkha. It's the Buddha established that not in order to make us feel more depressed or have more pain in our lives, but rather this is the entry point. That appreciation. That's the signal that things are out of balance, that the mind is not seeing clearly. So bringing attention to that quality of dukkha. That's it's a say counterintuitive in some ways, because we want to get away from suffering, we want to not feel that. But the Buddha's approach is like, no, if we want to be free of suffering, the first thing to do is to bring attention right to it. If what we want to work towards is dukkha nirodha, the first thing to do is to recognize dukkha. And so that, like using the Four Noble Truths as an analogy, or using a medical diagnosis as a comparable format to the Four Noble Truths, and the analogy of using physical illness as a way of looking at the nature of the spiritual development. And the Buddha compared the Four Noble Truths, or not so much as the Buddha, but in later years, the Four Noble Truths are mapped onto a medical diagnosis, so that dukkha is the symptom. Then dukkha, the first Noble Truth refers to the symptom, that they're suffering. The second Noble Truth refers to the cause of that. What's the cause of the symptom? What's the infection or the injury? The third Noble Truth is the prognosis. Is it curable? Can it be fixed? Is health possible? And fortunately the answer is yes, it is. And then the fourth Noble Truth is the treatment. That's the medicine that's needed to arrive at that state of health, represented by the third Noble Truth. So that acknowledging that there's a symptom, that's the thing that is important. If you're ignoring the symptom and pretending it's not there, or just distracting yourself from it, then you're never going to treat the cause and arrive at true health. And so that's the principle on which the Buddha established the format of the Four Noble Truths. And so that suffering is our teacher is a simple statement, but it contains within it that whole, the basic approach that we have in Buddha Dhamma. So rather than avoiding suffering, or negating it or distracting the mind from it, or numbing suffering, it's the method that the Buddha encourages is bringing the attention right to that. Idang dukkhang, this is dukkha. Here is dukkha. So that acknowledging it, receiving it, knowing it, that becomes the way that it is eventually transcended. Any questions? Yes, Roman, can you use a microphone?
Ajahn, you read a bit about also looking at the unpleasant aspects of investigation, that when you were reading what Luang Por said, and it's a bit also follow-up on what Maureen said, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a misrepresentation of the Buddha's teaching if we talk dismissively of samatha meditation or not mention the jhanas, because they're not just for blissing out, in my opinion, they're for generating high states of concentration, which can be used for vipassana. And actually a kind of vipassana that couldn't be done as efficiently without the jhanas. So I don't know how many dozen or 100 times the Buddha mentions that he entered the jhanas, and at the moment of his death he went through all the jhanas and then actually died in the fourth jhana. So I understand that, there can be proclivity towards, vipassana, but I think the jhanas should also be mentioned, since the Buddha himself mentioned them literally all the time. So if you could give your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, certainly the quality of, say, concentration is important, and that the lack of emphasis on jhana or getting into details on that, both in the style of teaching of Luang Por Sumedho, is based a lot on the way that people get focused on attainment or accomplishment or trying to get something, and so that say setting the conditions whereby the mind can concentrate and develop jhana, but without getting caught up in the idea of gaining something or getting somewhere. That's the ideal, really. And so that you are creating the conditions and establishing the skill of concentrating the mind, but not letting the mind make a big deal about whether this is first jhana or second jhana, or whether you've got it or you haven't got it, or whether somebody else has or hasn't. Because I think that's the downside of that, is where people get very focused on what level they've got to, or what they should have or they shouldn't have. And the ideas around it make the mind more agitated and confused. So that if you look at the teachings of Luang Por and Luang Por Sumedho, then there's quite a lot of instruction in concentration, and but almost a deliberate avoidance of talking about particular levels or signs of who's, what level you're at, to just try and not feed that the gaining mind, or the mind that's trying to say get something, and that the emphasis is more on using right understanding or right attitude, so that then, when those states of concentration are there, the mind can use those as a basis for developing insight, but without making a big deal about what level that has been reached or hasn't been reached. So that it's that's the thinking behind a lack of emphasis on that, or avoiding that. So similarly, Luang Por and Luang Por Sumedho's style of teaching, they tend to avoid talking about states of liberation, like stream entry or once returner, non-returner, arahat. They kind of avoid talking in those terms, because people get very focused on accomplishment and what stage they're at, or what they've reached, what they haven't reached. And that I remember one time I was on a retreat with Luang Por Sumedho, and a 10-day retreat he was leading, and every single talk was based on letting go of self-view, letting go of doubt, and letting go of attachment to conventions. And he never mentioned stream entry once in 10 days, but all the talks, all the instruction was about understanding the first three fetters and letting go of them and transcending them. So providing the tools for the development of those qualities and that level of insight, but not sort of holding up the idea of it as to feed the gaining mind. So similarly with jhana, that Ajahn Chah would say, well, let's just talk about levels of peacefulness. It's just different degrees of peacefulness. That's all, and not getting caught up in the details of it. So I certainly recognise that the mind needs to have a quality of focus and have a steadiness of attention to genuinely be a support for insight. But that's the motivation behind not talking a lot in those particular terms. Some teachers do talk a lot in those terms and make a big thing of it. So like Ajahn Brahmawangsa or Ayakema, her student Lee Bracington, in other Buddhist countries, they make also quite a lot of it. But this particular style of teaching and practice, Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Sumedho tended to steer away from that. So personally, I follow along on the same track as their way of speaking. And that also the other aspect of it is that for many Westerners, the effect of a lot of our education system and the conditioning of the mind is that we've got very highly developed intellectual faculties, thinking mind, and a lot of verbalization, and so deep states of concentration are not easily accessible for many Westerners. It tends to be far more of a challenge to develop those, where again, and not to typecast people, but oftentimes if the people from a culture where there's less of an emphasis on intellectualism and information gathering and such like, it tends to be much easier for people to develop profound states of concentration. So that I think one of the reasons why many Westerners gathered around Ajahn Chah and this style of practice is because the emphasis is not on the development of, say, the jhanas to a very high degree, but more using the quality of reflective wisdom. So they have these, what they talk about in terms of the pathways to liberation. You have the Panya Vimutti, liberation through wisdom, and the Ceto Vimutti, liberation through mind training, and that. Those two tracks are talked about very much as say distinct qualities in the teachings, and that Ajahn Chah made a point of saying what the track that he emphasized was that of Panya Vimutti, the pathway of wisdom, and that so that by developing that, then people might not necessarily develop so much in the way of profound states of concentration, but the quality of insight is much richer, much stronger. They also, in the scriptures, they talk about wet enlightenment and dry enlightenment. So wet enlightenment is with the development of the psychic powers and such like, which comes from a lot of the development of concentration. And dry enlightenment is enlightenment without any of the psychic powers. And so that, again, I couldn't tell you exactly where Ajahn Chah said it, but it was something that he would make he would refer to or make comment on, is that he teaches the way of dry enlightenment rather than wet enlightenment. He would never talk about the value of developing psychic powers. He virtually never spoke about that kind of side of things. And if people felt that he had demonstrated some kind of psychic power, then he wouldn't make anything of it. He didn't praise anybody else for having those kind of abilities. He really just didn't make much of it. And again, because he could see that people can get very distracted and caught up in the idea and sort of the glamour and interestingness of, so that somebody can read people's minds or see into past lives, or they can have conversations with devas and such like, that he wouldn't pick that up or follow that at all. So he very deliberately took the sort of dry enlightenment track and emphasized that in the way that he spoke and the qualities that he encouraged. So, did you have a question, William, or just gesture of approval? Any other questions? Yes, Gaspar.
the audio team is usurping the microphone, so apologies for that. Very quickly, Ajahn, I am sort of puzzled by this idea of the nada sound, and I was wondering if you can sort of get into more details. What is the relationship with the tinnitus exactly? Because I have tinnitus, and I don't know if that is something that I can use as a practice, because it sounds like I could, because it's always there, but...
Opinions vary. I wrote a little book called Inner Listening that covers a lot of the questions about the nada yoga. Yeah, it's... I can't say exactly what people's experience of tinnitus might be. Some people it's quite oppressive, but I did have one fellow. I was leading a day-long meditation on this on nada yoga and inner listening, and in California. And this fellow came up to me and said, "I spent $20,000 trying to get rid of this, and in one day, I've learned how to make it work for me. So I don't know whether I should be happy or I should go and try and get my money back from the doctor." You know, and he was kind of joking but not joking. But so that because I think for some people, tinnitus is such a incredibly loud and dominating presence, for like being in on sort of an airport runway. You know, it's just really oppressive, and so anything that can get their attention away from that is helpful. So in that respect, I would say it's not a useful practice. But for many people, I think that they can hear the nada sound, and they've just decided it's something that they don't like and they don't want, and they wish it would go away. And it's mostly attitudinal rather than a sort of biological, sort of an oppressiveness based on a biological factor. But so it's more like that fellow that day. I must admit, I was quite pleased by that. He's, rather than thinking of it as a problem, but the change of attitude, you can make it work for you. And so that's what I would encourage. And again, I'm not an expert in the field, but it seems to be that for the majority of people, it's, if they can hear that inner sound, it's not particularly oppressive. Some people find it really so beautiful and delightful, and it's like their best friend is always with them. And other people, it's like, well, it's kind of like having a hairdryer going, or a speaker that won't shut off. But still, it's a presence that one can use, and so that if you say change the attitude or establish the attitude of this is something that helps the mind to be awake and to be attentive and attuned to the present, then it's something that is really valuable. Yes, if you can use a microphone. It's on. Yeah.
So my question is kind of related to all three, but from personal experience of the last one, I have tinnitus, which is so loud, it actually deafens me, so I don't hear. So I have a hearing aid for when I need to hear, and I have a noise generator to cancel out the tinnitus when it's really loud. So I have two problems going on at the same time. So my hearing can be, it actually affects how I think and how I speak as well. Sometimes it comes out because it's such I'm quite overbearing. It's really struggle with it. Actually, it was when I first started meditating, I could really hear it. It was really loud. I thought, wow, this is louder than ever. So I don't know what to do with the loudness of the sound. But you mentioned the gaps and looking at gaps, and I realised, there are gaps. There's a relief. There's some gaps here, and it's when there's other background noises. And so the ocean is a good one. the ocean. When I'm near the ocean, it's just, wow, I can't hear this noise. It's subdued into the background sound. So, the idea that when we do actually recognize that, that these spaces in our awareness, Luang Por uses a lot of skillful means, in my view, in terms of language. I remember doing a retreat. It was called Mind the Gap, and it was basically on Mahamudra. And there was two things that we were asked to investigate, and that is, where is the sense of self? What is self? Where does it exist? Is it inside us? Is it outside? Where is that presence of self? And also, the second thing was that to look at the sounds, and that was really interesting for me to explore that, especially with this really, really loud sound going on. This was before I come across the sound of silence by Luang Por. And I remember that was really helpful in terms of turning my attitude to it in a different way. Oh, it's not that bad actually, and if I can actually use it, and it is peaceful in some stages, but then it's not, and I could see the difference between when it was changing, oscillating almost. And I never saw that before, because it was just one big loudness which was overbearing, and I wanted to get rid of it, obviously. The third aspect would be of the three questions is, so we have calmed the mind down, let's say, to a fair enough degree where, let's say, the five hindrances are not so demanding, not so present. And for me, it seems that that's the intuitive place in my understanding of my experience, that I would use my own dialogue, let's say, to look at something like the three marks of characteristics, the three characteristics: impermanence, dukkha, and anatta. And I would focus on one aspect of that, for a bit of time. And I keep the dialogue going. There's an inner dialogue of conceptual thought, but it's not the same as me thinking about any, the chatter. And I found that was, that's the workshop for me. That's where I need to work, or that's some area I need to be more skillful, and that's why I'm here, and I'm wanting to be more, as you said, learn that skill. I want to learn, how can I develop that skill? I had, very good responses already, but so my question is that I use my own language, which is slightly modified to, it's impermanent, but it's unstable because of the instability. It leads me to dukkha, to my unsatisfaction. And so I have this dialogue going along, and then I go to the next aspect. So my question is, it seems important that we learn that for ourselves, that skill in that way.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So, and I encourage that to find your own language and to vary it, because that's why the other day in that morning reflection I was saying how to use your own. For many people, English is not their first language. Use your own language, use your own wording, because it's not a matter of repeating precise terms, but it's what is the way of phrasing things that brings about that change of view. The mind shifts its relationship to experience and sees it in a more broad and clear way. And sometimes using a particular phrase or a term, if you use it a lot, then it loses its strength. The mind becomes inured to it or accustomed. And so just shifting things around or changing the phraseology, that can have a very beneficial effect. So I feel that it's good for people to experiment and to find your own ways of languaging things. And then the main purpose is bringing into being that quality of insight, the wise reflection. It's the results of that reflecting that is the important thing. The change of view, the seeing through the apparent solidity of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, seeing through the habits of self-creation and being able to let those go. So I see it's gone past 7 o'clock already, so let's wrap up there for today.